The Last of Us. There is no denying the critical acclaim that this game has received over the years. It's also a game that is going to come out for the third time now. The first time it came out was back in June of 2013 when it shipped for the PlayStation 3. Then came The Last of Us Remastered for PlayStation 4, which launched on July 29th, 2014. You may recall that game was set to launch at full price, but then last minute it did get a $10 price drop, so it went from $60 to $50, and those who pre-ordered digitally, they did get a $10 refund when that price drop happened. Even back then, I recall there were arguments surrounding the price point of Last of Us Remastered, given that sure, it looked better than the original, but it was still just a re-release of the original game, and there was no upgrade path from what I recall to boot. And now we're seeing sort of that same conversation cropping up again with the release of The Last of Us Part 1, aka The Last of Us Remake, which was announced back in June of 2022 during Summer Game Fest. And you can see right here some of the changes that they advertised in the blog post. We've implemented modernized gameplay, improved controls, and expanded accessibility options. And then beyond that, you've got effects, exploration, and combat that have all been enhanced. Scrolling further down, you'll find comparison images, and looking at them, yeah, you can definitely see there have been some improvements in visual fidelity, character models and animations, environments and whatnot. Definitely can tell there are improvements on that front. And this is actually, these cutscenes are actually pre-rendered, whereas the graphics here, this is real time on PlayStation 5. Nobody's denying that it's ultimately going to be a good game because it is still just The Last of Us, which is a phenomenal game, one of my favorites and many people's favorites. But there is an argument surrounding whether this game is worth the $70 price tag, the marked up price tag of this generation of consoles. And beyond that, they're selling digital deluxe editions that are worth $80 and this Firefly edition that's $100. One factor that's especially making people question whether this package is worth $70 is the fact that the multiplayer mode will not be included with The Last of Us Part 1. There isn't a remastered or remade version of that multiplayer mode. It's just a single-player campaign, unlike previous Last of Us releases, though Naughty Dog is working on a full-fledged standalone multiplayer game that's going to be a spin-off of The Last of Us. So there's that. But it doesn't change the fact that they're charging $70 for what is ultimately a diminished overall package with The Last of Us Part 1. And yes, the graphics do look beautiful and there are definitely enhancements there, but people were hoping for the price point to at the very least stick to $60. The final saving grace would be if combat and gameplay mechanics have been modernized, if they have included things from Last of Us Part 2 like going prone and dodging and whatnot. But based on the latest gameplay trailer, it would seem as though that stuff won't be in The Last of Us Part 1. In fact, overall moment-to-moment gameplay mechanics, and features don't look all that different from previous Last of Us releases, which further diminishes the value of Part 1 in people's eyes, which is why if you go to the Last of Us Part 1 Rebuild for PlayStation 5 video that came out recently on July 21st, 2022, that kind of goes through an overview of the changes that you can expect from this package, you'll see that the likes to dislikes ratio is not looking good at all, with 85,000 upvotes and 54,000 downvotes. So you can see right here, very mixed reception. And looking at the comments, you can see that a lot of the complaints that I discussed are brought up once again. Hefty price tag, but the game does look incredible. I hope the gameplay and enemy AI is on par with how it was in Last of Us Part 2. I will patiently and eagerly wait for this to go on sale. It looks really great, but I simply can't justify spending $100 Canadian on a game that I've played multiple times and that has released multiple times. Scrolling down further, here's somebody else saying it's interesting they didn't include the gameplay elements within combat as they had in Last of Us Part 2. I feel like that would have been a worthy inclusion and heightened the gameplay aspect of this remake and in turn enhanced the value in the eyes of the public. Here's another similar comment with 11,000 upvotes. It definitely looks better, but the price tag is pretty high despite this being one, if not my favorite video game of all time. And then there are some folks who will bring up the fact that this package doesn't even include a multiplayer mode. Looks beautiful. It's a mistake not to enhance combat, not to add Last of Us Part 2 elements like, again, prone and dodging. And the lack of the multiplayer mode is mentioned here, some kind of enhanced version of that included in the package, combined with enhancements and modernizations to combat. That would have made it worth that $70. It would have felt more like a proper, more full-fledged remake rather than a graphics remake with gameplay that's still similar enough where it's probably not going to feel too different when you play the final game, is what people are speculating. And the likes to dislikes ratio is even worse if you look at re-uploads of this gameplay and enhancements overview on other outlets like IGN here, whose likes to dislikes ratio is 9.7 thousand upvotes and 12,000 downvotes, more downvotes than upvotes. Same for GameSpot's re-upload with 1.1 thousand upvotes and 2.1 thousand upvotes. And the comments of both pretty much relay and echo the same things we've seen in the PlayStation uploads comments. So with that out of the way, let's actually take a look at this gameplay overview and enhancements overview. I'll skip around through the magic of editing. Right here, you can kind of see that the visual enhancements are definitely there, but they don't really talk about moment-to-moment gameplay enhancements or inclusions of Last of Us Part 2 features, which I get why that might disappoint some people. So here we go.
I'm coming.
We're working on those flashbacks within that scene for the first game. We got excited with the idea of like, oh man, what if we made The Last of Us Part 1 to look as good, if not better, than what we have done with Last of Us Part 2.
The tech of the
Okay, that looks pretty good.
It's like an open box of tools and goodies. 4K, HDR, improved haptics, 60 frames, reimagine The Last of Us.
I mean, there are definitely across-the-board improvements.
Opportunities to rebuild our characters.
The foliage has been enhanced. The lighting, the animations definitely do look better.
I mean down to the irises and the pupil depth.
This game does look gorgeous.
Aside from that, the facial animation is just way more believable. Like all the nuances, all the little subtle reactions, glances, glares, right? Like you get all of it almost closer to sort of the original performances.
So no matter what, you stick to me like glue. Like glue. Like glue. Got it. Good. Good.
Have the highest fidelity characters in the cutscene, but also in gameplay. It's the same character, so now we can do these seamless transitions in and out. Every part of the game has benefited from seamless transitions. And
right, it's no longer from pre-rendered cutscene to gameplay. It's now like all in-engine, so...
Our stories happen in gameplay, on a stick.
She knew my mom.
Now, some of this stuff, it's harder to tell the difference.
Constantly in this world.
Like some of those in-game side-by-sides. I don't know if that's YouTube compression or the specific scenes they showed, but I mean, once you get up close to stuff, that's when the differences really become apparent.
One of the
and we look at vistas.
things that the PlayStation 5 is really enabling is that we're able to have a density of physics objects in a scene that we could never do before. Bumpables, chippables, breakables, destructible objects in a scene just makes the world feel rich, makes it feel lived in. Materials can have the properties that you'd expect. The turret truck in Pittsburgh.
Last of Us Part 2 did have some of the best glass I'd ever seen in video games.
The concrete and sending objects flying
in terms of the physics and how they respond.
Break. Like there's fear, there's a real fear that it invokes.
So seeing that in Part 1's pretty cool.
It's giving us a much more dynamic range of gameplay to play with.
Around him!
Our AI tech has just increased incredibly. Sophisticated systems for things like the fundamental knowledge model of how these NPCs perceive and understand what the player is much more sophisticated.
Enhancing the AI is pretty cool.
Are communicating with each other, how they're chasing you, how they're flanking you, how intense that fight feels. It's so much more rewarding coming out of it from the other side.
Ooh. That scenery looks pretty.
One of the other big AI improvements is the buddies. The buddies technology that we developed for The Last of Us Part 2 has this very sophisticated understanding of like, okay, this is where the enemies can see their exposure. We not only have exposure, we have future exposure. So in 3 seconds, that corner is going to be exposed. So I'd better move now to avoid this enemy seeing me.
So Buddy AI
really
can predict
very complex decisions and maintain that feeling of stealth much more believably.
Or try to foreshadow the enemy's next movements.
Another motion matching. Motion matching is this technology that's basically using logic that tries to match the desired movement to a bucket of hundreds of animations. A mocapped actor has gone in and run this whole gauntlet of movements to get a really full set of all the different ways a person can move. And then it's basically every frame trying to find the best matching animation that fits the path of where the character is going to go.
The
And this
transitions
motion
do look
model
very smooth.
gives this really seamless sense of transition. The player's movement is just a lot cleaner. It's this really smooth, organic movement through the space.
First, we just had to build that core experience. And then beyond that, we wanted to add several features that fans have been asking for.
Photo
For
mode.
example, we now have a permadeath mode. Along that, we've added a brand new speedrun mode, so players can time themselves. There's a whole community of gamers that just want to see
That's
how
pretty cool.
fast they can play through this game. Beyond that, we added a bunch more of unlockables. So there's all these
Cosmetic
different outfits
customization.
for Ellie and Joel that people can unlock. A model viewer mode, so people can really appreciate the details. We added award-winning accessibility features.
Every
That's dope.
single
Last of Us Part 2's
accessibility
accessibility
option that we
features
offer,
are above and
that's a
beyond.
barrier removed for someone.
So to see that here
As
is
she
really
surveys the
cool to
apartment, her
make it
eyes
more
wander
accessible
Joel.
to.
She steps past the couch. He wears the wristwatch Sarah gifted him, which now has a cracked face.
To my knowledge, this is
folks
the
who
first
don't have
PlayStation game that has audio description built into the
certain
game,
capabilities.
built into the cinematics.
Now it's nighttime. Joel stirs in his sleep.
And that's really the way we've tried to push the frontier of accessibility on this game.
These character models and animations do look damn impressive. And I mean, yeah,
So
this
much
environment
of
does
the
look beautiful.
identity of The Last of Us is the world.
We revamped completely the art direction. You know, everything from these expansive vistas that not only are they beautiful, but you feel the environments. You feel the environments in a much more visceral way. The rooftops overlooking the Capitol building, for example, like just the breath of fresh air when you go up there and you just like, you feel that sort of release in tension. And then, you know, to juxtapose that down in the tunnels in Wilds, and you get that dank, flooded tunnel feel, that humidity, you can actually feel it. All these
Okay, I don't know about
environments are just
that.
completely reimagined.
It does look
Now
nice,
we got
but
our engine on the PS5,
feeling the moisture of
haptics,
the
3D
video
audio,
game,
the
I don't
fast
know, it's a
loading.
little.
It really creates a much more immersive and
It does
because of
look
that,
good,
much
though,
more
but come
emotional
on.
experience.
One of the things I absolutely love with the 3D audio in The Last of Us Part 1 is being able to hear an enemy before they sneak up on you. Skitter around in a different room and you're hearing them trying to get up behind you. Really heightens that sense of just being grounded. You are in this character, you are in this world. The amount of control that developers have over the DualSense, it's really, really cool. The way it works with the bow is that at the very beginning when they're starting to
Haptic
draw the
feedback
bow,
and
there's a
adaptive
little bit
triggers, of
resistance.
course.
And then as the bow gets tauter and tauter, the amount of resistance is increasing. And then when you release the bow, you're also getting that resistance going out of the trigger. Haptic vibration on the pump of the shotgun. And what's much more sophisticated about that on the DualSense is that, and those two beats is what you're going to feel on the controller.
This looks like a good spot.
This also ties in to the new workbench animations. So if you're seeing Joel taking apart a gun or screwing something in or putting a new stock on a gun, that moment where he's like jamming that on, you're going to get that haptic feedback on that. We have, you know, haptics all across the board, you know, for all the moments you kind of expect, for clambering, jumping, landing, meleeing, getting meleeed, like all those kind of high intensity moments we have represented in the haptics. When Joel goes in to pet the giraffe, getting that little light touch on the haptics as he's petting the giraffe.
You can
To me,
feel
that's
the fur on the
essence of
giraffe.
The Last of Us. It's the high tension moments, it's the low tension moments.
I do love
all
this scene,
of it
though.
Feeling.
Was that everything you hoped for?
Jury's still out.
Playing as Joel and Ellie on this journey, then to take that experience and really honor it and keep the authenticity of it, but elevate it in every way possible, whether it's pipeline, whether it's art direction, whether it's a technology, everything that allows us to make that experience better. Not different, extremely better. That's why, to me, this is the definitive way to play The Last of Us.
September 2nd, 2022. This is probably going to be the definitive version of The Last of Us 1. I do think that the developers are putting a lot of work into this. I don't think this is like a lazy cash grab. It's more just people do feel it's a little overpriced, given what it does exclude from previous 2 releases, and the fact that the gameplay itself doesn't look, like on a mechanical level, doesn't look all that different. We don't get some of those new features we got in part 2. Even within the category of remakes, there is a spectrum. You know, there's Final Fantasy VII Remake, which is like all the way to the top end of remakes. I mean, that's like a proper remake, not just in combat and mechanics and visuals, but also in where the story is headed. It's just kind of gone in its own direction. Sort of in that area are also Resident Evil 2 and 3 Remake, though not as drastic of a remake as FF7 Remake, because the stories are relatively still true to the original, though obviously they still change aspects of how things are paced and whatnot. But those are 2 games whose gameplay and visual are very, very different from the original Resident Evil 2 and Resident Evil 3. So for those remakes, people can more easily justify a $70 price tag because they are so much more enhanced and different from the original, because they are proper remakes built from the ground up that try to represent much of what came before, but also completely push the modernization of visuals, audio, gameplay, you name it. And then a category below that, I'd say, is something like Demon's Souls Remake from Bluepoint, which is a very faithful remake of the original, but the graphics are so much more enhanced, like it's just night and day, and there are enough gameplay modernizations where things just feel smoother. And then on the lower end of that spectrum is something like Shadow of Colossus Remake by Bluepoint, which they did label a remake, but is fundamentally the same game. It's just the graphics is basically what's been kind of touched up quite a bit and remade in a lot of ways. But that was a game that launched at a $40 price point because the fundamental game was just basically the same. It's the fundamentally same framework that's just had a new coat of paint, a remade coat of paint from a graphic standpoint. So Shadow of Colossus Remake would have been harder to justify a full-fledged $60 price tag. So the fact that they lowered it really went a long way with people being able to like look at this remake and saying, maybe I'll buy this again. So where does Last of Us Part 1 fit in that spectrum? For me, I'd say it resides somewhere between Shadow of Colossus Remake and Demon's Souls Remake, sort of somewhere in the middle there. The enhancements to AI is nice, the addition of, a timer for speedrunners and new features like permadeath and photo mode and accessibility, those are great. 2 thumbs up on that front. But whereas Demon's Souls Remake did modernize the gameplay of the original Demon's Souls quite a bit, where you could feel it, from what I'm seeing in the footage and from what a lot of people are getting from the trailer, and the fact that the gameplay overview didn't address moment-to-moment gameplay mechanics and features enhancements seems to indicate that when you get your hands on the controller, in terms of how the game plays, it's overall gonna feel like just The Last of Us 1 we've already played. Which is why a lot of people are getting the impression that while Last of Us Part 1 Remake does feel like more of a remake than Shadow of Colossus Remake, it doesn't quite feel like it's still worth $70. I think $60 is where it should have been at. $50 maybe because of the lack of that multiplayer mode. Or at the very least, offer an upgrade path for those who have purchased previous releases of Last of Us. Give them a discount. Something like that would have kind of helped smooth out the feedback surrounding Last of Us Part 1. Now, I've also seen the argument put out there, what if FromSoft came out with a Bloodborne remake whose gameplay was basically fundamentally the same, but the graphics and audio and all these things, that's the area where they concentrated on when it comes to enhancements, and they priced that $70. I feel like with that game, a lot of people would be still very excited. Maybe some might complain about the price point, but because that's been such a highly demanded enhancement, a lot of people would definitely dig it. And I think it's just a matter of perspective, because with Bloodborne, that game shipped with 30 frames per second, a stuttery 30 FPS at that, and we haven't gotten a remastered for that like Last of Us 1 did. And so that remake would feel maybe substantial enough and would be exciting enough that maybe people would be willing to shell out $70 for it. With Last of Us Part 1, I think it's both the fact that this game has already been re-released once, and the fact that overall it is a less feature-complete package with that lack of multiplayer. Demon's Souls Remake, you look at that game, and the multiplayer component is there. It is feature complete. It does have everything the original game had and more, whereas Last of Us Part 1 is missing a little piece, and it doesn't feel so different from the original release compared to how different Demon Souls Remake feels from its original release. So that's kind of where the general conversation's at, and different people are going to have different opinions. Some folks who just love Last of Us 1 are going to be excited to pay $70 for this, but for others who still love the game, who have played this game over and over again, and who have purchased this game twice already, they're like, look, give us a break here, sell this at a cheaper price point, or give us an upgrade path, given that overall this is kind of the same game. So that's everything you need to know about the discourse surrounding Last of Us Part 1 and my take on everything. Let me know in the comments below what your thoughts and opinions are on Last of Us Part 1. Do you think it is enough of a remake to justify $70? Is it a project that you're ultimately excited for? Share your thoughts on all of this below, and to be further updated on all things gaming news, reviews, and discussions, stay tuned right here on Young Yeah. I'll see you guys next time. Young out.